So I have a question about what you said earlier regarding this idea that the hackerspaces were not places where you would like to see the finished product, and that when something is done, it should leave the space. And I was wondering, isn't there a risk if you see it that way, that you know, we're going to find again this old dichotomy between the nice hackers that experiment and then the bad corporations that come afterwards and try to appropriate all the innovations. And I was wondering in that respect what you thought of this recent initiative by Stanford University to become a venture capitalist and to be able to invest into students' projects that are done in hackerspaces.
Wow, that's a really interesting question for me personally. I don't know whether I managed completely to open it. Like, this is for me the new research that would need to be done. And I'm curious more like about case studies, space by space. How do they do with these issues of, you know, do we want like a product, or we want just a process? Do we want just workshops? Do we want just education? Or we want something we can sell, or we can, and you know, I really see several of examples, like BioCurious in some sense would be, which is this BioArt hackerspace. I know the situation in my Czech hackerspace, what is going on when there is a product, and it either destroys the space or destroys the community, because it becomes somehow the money changed the power relations, and people are not equal anymore. It destroys the utopia of we're here just to have fun and tinker. And I see how most of these places do figure out how to still preserve the community, but somehow create a startup on the side which contributes to the community on voluntarily basis, rather than, okay, you know, you developed it in our hackerspace, we really expect the 10% or something. Okay, and this other question about university creating a hackerspace, that's like another huge issue, and I'm personally curious whether it's like just, is it real hackerspace? What does it mean, a hackerspace at the university? Because, you know, you pay the university to use the facilities, and what? You pay like another hackerspace to be a member, or?
And what they did actually is that they already had hackerspaces. Now they decided to create a venture capital fund at Stanford University, so they can become investors in the projects that are developed by students within those hackerspaces. So they can become investors, financial investors.
I mean, this is even more complicated because it's about incubators, hackerspaces, and the universities. So I'm not certain whether this is not in some sense too complicated as a structure. And, yeah, sorry.
No, go.
Yeah, and I don't see that many good examples. Or I am not aware. I'm not, you know, everywhere. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to sound like an authority on this. I don't see that many places like a successful hackerspace university cooperation. I'm trying to set up one in Singapore, and I'm not completely certain it works. Or it has to be this feeling, actually, now we are not part of the university. I even think it shouldn't be at the university. Something about, it needs to be in the city. It needs to be to interact with different communities outside of the university. And also with the university, these are all these rules, like ethics approval, you know, what type of contracts you have about if you're a scientist, if you develop something, the university owns it, like that's in my contract even if I'm not producing anything interesting. So I'm lucky to be a social scientist, a bit something weird. But yeah, there are all these other issues. Why would you do it with the university?
Yeah, well, that also has to do with all the different definitions of open, I guess, and the way those new roles that make people hop from being a hacker to an artist to an academic, yeah, still undefined. Interesting. More questions?
Indeed, I have a question for you. You started explaining what your role as a philosopher is, and how that you're a designer and a philosopher, and then you started presenting your part on philosophy, but it was very brief, and basically what you showed us were some scans of the brain. So I was wondering if you can tell a bit more about how you relate to the philosophical tradition or to current debates in philosophy and neuroscience. I don't know what you were thinking.
Maybe that wasn't so useful for this type of presentation, but I do have certain So what comes out for me from these collaborations are often texts. So sometimes I even publish in the official journals. It's more science technology studies stuff. I'm not certain whether I can really label it as a philosophy, but I would say maybe the most philosophical issue I have around these practices. I'm interested in how in a 16th century tinkering science, so in basically natural philosophy, and how modern science was created, like the whole Francis Bacon project, how it was created by making a strong statement against alchemy, mechanical arts, and tinkering. So how our modern idea of science relates to tinkering. So that is something I'm trying to contribute to as a philosopher, reminding us of that tinkering, mechanical arts tradition, and thinking what type of knowledge it is, and how it relates to what we are doing now in these hacker spaces, whether it's not some return of the repressed, or...
What do you mean by that?
Because when Francis Bacon is defining the project of modern science as this institutional science, where we will be able to share our knowledge and share our results and be open and collaborative, people are aware that he's saying this against the bookish knowledge that is just text and sharing just this theoretical knowledge. So he was like against this religious, scholastic. We just do a lot of like text and analysis and semantic exercises. So people think he was on the side of practice, but actually, when you read him, what for me is fascinating, the people he really hated were people that were thinkers. So he says, oh, they're all these mechanical artists, and you know what? They have amazing results. They come up with these cool effects and things. They're magicians, yeah, but they cannot explain how they cannot give an account how they, how they invented, how they discovered this. And there is a real tension in his concept of institutionalized science against this tinkering. Things happen almost by chance. Things happen by being involved with materiality and having this very hands-on approach. And I think he was unfair, or I'm reading him I love him for some other reasons, but I believe he was unfair to these mechanical artists. So I'm looking actually at a really interesting figure. I cannot do archive research, so I'm reading other historians of science that do it. I think he was a Dutch guy here who created the first submarine. He probably created some of the first microscopes, and Drebel, Cornelius Drebel. I think he was in one of the universities here. He has some people. Where?
He was in Alkmaar. He used to work at Alkmaar.
Okay, yeah. So I think he's like a fascinating 16th century hacker. And what this guy did back then, I think it's more interesting than what Francis Bacon did. But we think modern science is Francis Bacon. And also these thinkers, mechanical artists, were much more, in some sense, inclusive. They were experimenting with the policy models by involving different aristocrats, creating a lot of utopian projects. So for me, I'm curious, it was such plurality back in the 16th century in terms of science-society interaction or knowledge, politics interaction, so many projects. Why did Francis Bacon win this race? Why, he was just a lawyer, he wasn't even a scientist.
Ingeborg, what do you think about the difference in the understanding that a bioartist can bring about of complex scientific subjects as compared to what is done in biohack spaces?
Well, the early, I would say, early bioartists like Joe Davis, for example, who was active at the MIT biology department for years and years, and I think he started in the early 80s. He was, I wouldn't say he trained himself being a molecular biologist, and he's extremely qualified in that field. Of course, he has no diploma, not from MIT, but I think the early bioartists, they were very, very much interested in what they did. But what we see now is that we see these artists in residencies, that we see all these art institutions providing labs. Young students, art students go in there, have very often no education in the sciences whatsoever, and they are just, I wouldn't even say tinkering, but just playing around. And, well, I don't think the outcome will be interesting stuff what you presented, because they are probably not driven by an idea or improving something or contributing something to a community, more or less just because bioart is a label that sells quite well at the moment. So I think the early bioartists had really to work their way into the institution with expertise and with good new ideas, with innovation. And nowadays these things are open, much more open for artists, or artists produce it themselves in their kitchen. So I won't say that there's, I guess there are some younger bioartists also very educated in that field, but I don't see that as, because the struggle was really, really hard for the bioartists to go into the institutions, and MIT is not opening the doors for everyone. So. Not in those days, not today.
Yeah.
In the end of your presentation, you mentioned first Freeman Dyson as a kind of a very optimist about where it's going and the future will be bright. And then the last slide was a totally different one, and it was about the risk and the things will go wrong, and you can make drugs, and you can make poison or anything else. Huh? And I just wonder if you have any idea where this is going now, because I know of an artist that was a biohacker that was for a while trapped by the USA government system because they thought he was a terrorist. And on the other side we see all those bad examples. So where does this go, do you think?
I think these as far as I know from people in New York and other places, these community labs get carefully monitored by the government. I'm not sure if they get paid by the government, but they get carefully monitored. And because they just don't know if some people with kind of criminal energy will probably create a bioweapon. But we have bioweapons, and they're out there, and the governments try to keep this in a kind of control. But when like these facilities are available for low costs, then and you get smart people getting all the information from the internet, or people who are quite unhappy in how kind of systems they live, for example, then they probably could do something like that. But maybe this is a fear you especially see in the States, but because in Germany we have a lot of high schools, especially in the south of Germany, called Biotechnology Gymnasium. And it's about 5 to 6% of all gymnasium. And people with the age of 12, 13 go in very, very interesting, very advanced labs in the school and learn how to do biotechnology from early age on, and get trained in summer schools in huge institutions like the Cancer Research Institute in Heidelberg. The teacher gets trained by the professors in the research institutions, and they don't have to wait for the latest school book to appear every couple of years. They get it all via internet, and these labs are much more advanced in their facilities than anything I saw, for example, at GeneSpace. But I don't think our police or anybody is monitoring what these children do. So I think it has a lot to do with how government trusts in their, people. And I guess probably not in the States. I guess they won't do that.
Ingeborg, what do you think yourself about that situation?
What I think that we have these biotech gymnasium, or?
Yes, and that the high knowledge is easily shared amongst young children to old, so that the science in itself is really explorable by anybody, and you know, you can apply it easily. What do you think yourself about that free knowledge?
About that free knowledge, you know,
Yeah.
like the reason, for example, why the schools and the German government does invest so heavily in these biotech schools is because they hope very much for that
I
there will.
understand that part. Yourself, as an individual, what do you think about that? Do you think it is a positive flow of spreading the science around? Or do you think it's a negative or a neutral flow?
No, but it's. I think I wouldn't say it's typical for an advanced country like Germany. But Germany has no resources. The only thing they have is.
Again, you're not saying your personal opinion.
Well, you know, if I could decide in what kind of you know, like knowledge schools would invest, it would be surely art, music, the humanities. But our government wants schools to be, you know, and the pupils in the schools to be, you know, Nobel Prize laureates when they get older. So this is a kind of investment to a certain type of industries that could probably emerge out of these development. I wouldn't say it's positive or negative, but it.
Neutral.
No, I can't understand. I can understand, but on the other hand, of course, the German government also invests heavily in music, in arts, in the school as well. So, and what we see in these scientific institutions, like in Heidelberg, the Cancer Research Institute, where we have, I think, 3,400 scientists doing research, they also they invest heavily in philosophers, in artists, coming into the institution.
Let me ask the question slightly differently. What if you were allowed to teach hazardous biological tests to anybody? Would you do that?
Well, it depends. It depends how people, you know, like. Of course, I think it's very bad producing bioweapons, but this did not happen so far in schools in Germany. So the problem is, why should we then abolish that?
I'm not saying to abolish it. I asked you if you would teach that practice. So if you have the knowledge of creating a biohazardous bomb.
Of course not. Of course not.
Well, so you would.
No. Actually, no. That's not my aim.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think this is. But we have these. Yeah, but there is a kind of risk. This is not unlikely to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
how you said, do you yourself inclined? Well, bio-artistically inclined. Are you bio-artistically inclined that you would like to use biology, bioatmosphere as an art form?
Yeah, but this is what bioartists do.
I'm sorry?
This is actually what bioartists do.
But are you yourself inclined to create this art?
If I would do it myself?
Yeah?
No, I'm actually no good with doing art, I guess.
Okay. And what about you?
So on issues of biosecurity and biosafety, I think we really need to understand a bit more science to have that type of discussion, because I do believe a lot of these threats or supposed threats in terms of creating a virus, it's actually not that easy, first of all. Like, I think there are a lot, like, we are not there yet. Another thing is, if I ask you, you know, would you teach people to use a tool that lets a group of terrorists self-organize and blew a building in the middle of New York? Would you let people use such tool or develop for such tool? What would you say? You would say no, but yes, it is the internet. There is not single technology we use or we are involved in as a humanity that cannot be misused. But you know, your question is, should we teach? Should we democratize it? Should we open it to people? And my answer would be in every sense yes, because somehow I have a trust that most people will not want that to be misused, or they would, they will know what to do when they see someone else misusing it, or somehow if there are more people that will understand how you hack viruses and some psychopath basically does something nasty, there will be more people that will know how to deal with that. While the situation that is right now, I have many issues with this discussion because I was involved as some other people here in these meetings with the FBI and the DIY bio community, and seriously, my opinion about it and the situation in the States, FBI is basically trying to invent a job for themselves. So, they're just harassing some DIY bio people because they're easy to harass, and they pretend they're doing like they're protecting people against some supposed threat. But I don't see their efforts being in any sense I don't think they created the better biosecurity measures or biosafety. They didn't resolve it. My trust would be more, if more people know about that technology, in case something bad happens, there will be more people that will know how to act or act quickly. Right now, the situation where it's not democratized serves only the interests of big corporations like Monsanto and some strange actors like FBI that have, in my opinion, a weird or unclear mandate. I don't know who votes them. I don't know who they represent. For me, they're the most strange organization. So it's quite radical. I have to say, in this, I do have a radical opinion.
Well, I don't think it's radical. I think it's honest and fair. I mean, open education and open sharing of everything. And when they created knives and swords, it was not any different. It's the people that use it.
Okay, so we're on the same page then.
Yeah.
I was kind of going to defend the DIY bio side and just say that you don't need a lab to make a bioterrorist weapon. It's actually really easy. I can tell you all now, I can teach you. It's raw sewage is one of the most successful methods of doing it. You make large numbers of people relatively ill, you cause a scandal, you won't kill people necessarily, you might kill a few. That's a very simple way of doing it. With the fear that biohackers in labs are going to genetically modify a virus and release it, I mean there are kind of what I guess people would term enemy powers with much more advanced labs than a DIY bio kind of setup, and all the facilities there, and if they want to do it, they will. I mean, I have a certificate in identification and handling of potential deliberate release category 3 organisms from Portland Down in the UK, which is the highest security lab in the UK on a military base, and I'm an artist. And it was actually built as a bioweapons facility. So, but they signed the bioweapons treaty, so they don't do it anymore, not since the 50s. So, I just don't think that that's a true kind of situation that's going to happen. I think that's just sort of gatekeepers to knowledge, saying, oh, that's the excuse for it, oh, we're going to create bioterrorism, or we're going to have some sort of lab accident. I don't think that's a valid concern particularly.
So we're talking about bioterrorism, but if you're looking at a smaller scale, allowing people to sequence their own genome, aren't you supposed to protect people from that, finding out they have some kind of very nasty disease, or finding out there's a very high chance of sort of cancers? Or maybe the information is got out to the public and some insurance companies are going to do something about it. Shouldn't be worried about that as well.
Actually, that's exaggeration. Like if you talk to any scientist that does research on SNPs or any of these, it's such a big field, and actually they need more data to understand how that gene interacts with the environment. Like we actually need more epigenetic studies, and right now the way science is done, I don't think we will ever get enough of data to understand it. The way you need to go through all these models of how you do research. Actually, citizen science would be really useful there. But what we see in these consumer genomic services and these attempts to involve the citizens right now, it's negative. 23andMe they seriously did this, and I'm still shocked by that. They patented an idea for designer babies based on the data people that use these services, and I have to say, yes, I sequence all my family on 23andMe, and right now I feel so angry and cheated that they misuse the information we put there as citizens and their clients. They used it to patent some bizarre idea about designer babies. And about the insurance companies, I went to some presentations which were interesting. Actually, they didn't sound like right now it's a big chaos. In different countries, there are different regulations of that future business around genetic information. So I think in Germany, it's interesting if you do your genetic test, you are obliged to share your data with the insurance companies. But everywhere it's different, and everywhere the rules right now are, yeah, we'll do this for the next 3 years, and then we'll see how it happens. But there are even more crazy stories. Like in Korea, is it Samsung, the big company there that owns the insurance company and the consumer genetic services? So it's like all connected in one consortium. And it's like one big mess. Like for me, yes, that was my interest in open data originally, consumer genomics, even fMRI data. But saying this, how dangerous it is for what can happen with these insurance companies, I still believe there is so much value in terms of sharing this data and supporting science and, you know, like doing citizen science projects. And I'm really willing and I really want to, that is why I have my fMRI scan and all this data. I would like to be more part of these scientific efforts, contribute data, support research, and I wish more people would join or knew how to join or there was a way to join, but right now it's not really possible or it's difficult or there are all kinds of problems.
Yeah, I would like to pose a last question to both of you. As we talked a lot about terrorism, about bioinformation, we talked about do-it-yourself practices, but again, back to the arts, because we are having this workshop about art-science collaborations. Do you think there is a real need, apart from all the big societal issues and challenges, within this sphere for bioarts and do-it-yourself practices to bond and to team up in order to reach out to that public more?
Yeah, of course. I think it's very important that scientists, artists, bioartists, practitioners, whoever teams up to, because there are some decent problems. But I think it's interesting. I showed you this comment from this risk report 2008. And I think this was the year of the crisis, and I think it is made clear that the real danger is probably not in some biohacking spaces somewhere in Singapore, but more or less in air-conditioned skyscrapers in New York and England and in London, for example, that can mess up our societies much more probably than any biohacking people.
I mean, I would just add to this, just look what is going on in Syria and all the weapon trades. And, you know, it's really sad, but a lot of European countries are taking part in this. It's really shameful. It's happening by governments are helping this type of business. I think we have some real issues to deal with rather than think about DIY bio at this moment as some dangerous force of the future. And yeah, I mean, I do believe whether it's art, DIY bio, or whatever efforts allow more citizens to understand scientific practices, to have some stake in scientific knowledge, to, you know, to be part of that R&D process, in the policy process, better. And in that sense, I'm supportive of
Yeah, and there's just one story that is coming up to my mind when you come up with Syria, because there was a bioart project that was on the reconstruction of human, for example. And now, because a lot of families in Syria are so in terrible condition financially, they sell their little daughters as long as they're virgins to rich Saudi Arabian husbands for 6 weeks or so, and this is a topic that bioartists brought up long before the mass media turned their attention to that topic. And I think this is a really serious problem. That is not just about, like bioweapons or chemical weapons, it's also about the bodies of people in Syria getting really, I would say, damaged in a way. And these things are brought up by bioartists, and I think that's quite important.